Hello, my friends. My name is Adam, and I'm on a quest to be the most prolific reviewer of all time. And to do that, I mostly honestly review movies, although I review other things occasionally. And I was watching a YouTube video about the worst biopics of this century, and it kind of inspired me to watch some of the content from that video, but also the argument was made that Amadeus, the film that I'm going to review now, is the best biopic. And I would say, with like doing this project, I've reviewed hundreds of films over the past year, and uh, I've had like great discoveries of directors and actors that I wouldn't have considered before, like Betty Davis and Kurosawa, and then I've discovered directors that I really hate, even though they are, considered to be some of the best directors of all time, like Sergei Leone. Really hate him, but I've also discovered that I despise the genre of biopic because the main problem with biopics is that you're taking a really every person's life is really complicated, and if you were going to make a movie about my life, the beginning of the life has nothing to do with the middle part of the life or the end of the life, I would say, right? And I'm just a normal guy with a YouTube channel, like any other guy with a YouTube channel, generally. But if you take the life of somebody much more complicated like Mozart, you're not going to be able to make a great story about the entirety of his life. So this is it's based on a play by Paul Shaffer, and it's called like a fantasy. He calls it like a historical fantasy about the rivalry between Salieri and Mozart. And so the movie does a bunch of things really well, and this is why I don't really consider it to be a biopic. I consider it to be a story which is inspired by Mozart's life and is not entirely about Mozart, even though Mozart heavily features in the film. So the first thing is the plot. So as I said, it's about the relationship between Salieri and Mozart. And there were rumors after Mozart died, because it was unclear. He dies at the age of 35, and it's unclear what killed him. I read in a Wikipedia article that it was kidney disease, but if you go to actually Mozart's Wikipedia article, it says something completely different. So it's still a mystery what killed Mozart. So in that era of mystery, Mozart was probably the most famous composer of his time, and everyone knew that there was this rivalry between him and Salieri, so there were rumors that Salieri had him poisoned. So to take that kind of rumor mill from 200 years ago, or 300 years ago, whatever it is, and make it into a movie really, really succeeds, because you are seeing the character of Salieri react to Mozart. So first, he has this sort of like kind of jealousy because Mozart is shown as this little boy prodigy playing with his eyes blindfolded, and Salieri is shown as this like boy who's just running around and playing and not really thinking about music. And then it contrasts Salieri's childhood of having to struggle to be good at music, and Mozart's just natural divine gift of being good at music. And so one of the things that is completely historically inaccurate, and I don't think it really matters because, as I said, this is a fantasy. It's not real biography. One of the things that is different from the historical record is that Salieri was married and he had 8 children and also a very public affair with somebody. So in the movie, it posits that Salieri has given, a vow of chastity to God, and in return, he wants the ability to write great music for God. And so this is his motivation. And as I said, he's a bit jealous of Mozart. And then they actually meet. And the scene in which they meet is really brilliant because you have, it's in the court of Emperor Joseph and the Austrian emperor. And Salieri, because he respects Mozart, he's written this march. And he says, oh, they're talking about Mozart. And the beginning, the way that Mozart gets hired is also a great scene. But anyway, the scene I'm thinking about, so Salieri says to the emperor, hey, Mozart's coming. I've written this march and I'd like to play it for him. And the emperor is like, oh, let me see. And he sees, and he's like, oh, can I play it for Mozart? And Salieri's like, sure, boss, whatever. And he's trying to play it, and he's playing it so badly. And Salieri can hear like, oh, Mozart's gonna have such a bad impression of me if he hears my music like this. And he's trying to coach the emperor very quickly, like, it's a march, go faster, it's a march. And then Mozart comes in, and, the emperor is playing this march, and Mozart bows to the wrong guy, because obviously the piano player wouldn't be the emperor, but he's corrected very quickly. And, they have a conversation, and the march is kind of forgotten for a while. And the conversation ends, and Mozart is leaving, and the emperor is going to give him the piece of music because Salieri wrote it for him, right? And Mozart's like, well, I don't need the paper. It's all in here. Thank you, Salieri. That's a wonderful gift, whatever. And this is weird, too, because Mozart at this time has been a child prodigy for most of his life. He's one of the most famous musicians in Europe. And the emperor's like, how could you remember that? Because one of the aspects of this movie is that the emperor is not very good at music, even though he wants to be. He wants to be considered to be this like figure of culture, but he's not great at music. And then Mozart reminds him, yeah, I'll play. So he sits down and he plays, and he's like, da 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 da. I don't remember how the melody goes, but he's playing it, and he's like, yeah, it just goes along like that, right? And Salieri's like, mm-hmm. And he's like, wouldn't it be better like this? And he like just makes it better in like 2 seconds. And Salieri's like, he realizes that his entire career has been for nothing because he's given his life and his chastity to God in return for his gift, but his gift isn't worth anything because there's this guy who's not very chaste, who is basically, like, apart from music, he's a bit of an imbecile. Like, he's like a goofy guy, and he laughs in a really ridiculous way. And that sparks his sort of obsession with destroying Mozart. And the plot is great because he actually does destroy Mozart. He blocks Mozart's career time after time. But, he loves Mozart. So he loves Mozart's work, and he will like sneak around behind people's backs to watch Mozart's work, but he's not going to try and promote Mozart's career. And it's really, really good. And he's always, Salieri's character is always like balancing between just insanely jealous and pure evil. And he always goes, which is the great thing too, because Salieri doesn't really murder Mozart, right? But the movie makes it so you could see why Salieri would believe that he murdered Mozart. And he kind of always, because the basic theme of the plot is this mediocrity versus genius. And Salieri is such a mediocrity that he can't even murder Mozart correctly. And he says that. He's like, yes, God took my revenge away from me too. And there's this great scene at the end where he's in the madhouse and he's like, I absolve all mediocrities. You're a mediocrity. I absolve you. I absolve you. And as a bit of a mediocrity myself, it kind of, I feel the pain of being a Salieri. Not that I am even as talented as Salieri, but you have all of these people who are much more gifted than you, and you can kind of understand that. Like, I think that's a very common human theme. So the plot works excellently. And the next part about that, and like the other thing is that Mozart, as I said, he's a bit of an idiot, but he's never mean, right? He's never mean-spirited. He doesn't have an evil ounce in his body. He really loves his wife. He might not know how to treat her correctly, but he really does love his wife. He's not like abusing her or anything. There's no drama connected to that. And the other thing about the movie that is great is the acting. And I haven't mentioned who, because these are not like really famous actors, but it stars F. Murray Abraham, and he plays Salieri, and Tom Hulce, who plays Mozart, and Elizabeth Berridge, who plays Constance, I think is the name of his wife. Yeah, Constance. And they all do such great jobs because, as I said, Salieri is portrayed as this sort of like older, professionally successful, but still a bit of a weirdo who's insanely jealous of Mozart. And Mozart is portrayed as this guy who is like a musical genius, because he was, but as I said, a bit of an imbecile and kind of with the social graces of somebody who's been performing since he was 5. So if you think about like Justin Bieber, I mean, I don't think Justin Bieber is a genius, but it's kind of like Mozart had Justin Bieber's childhood, although Justin Bieber, of course, it was much worse because all of the media and social media when he was a boy, it was like quite different than Mozart's time. And then you have Constance, or I think he says Terenza, so he has some kind of nickname Mozart does for her. So she is played in this way, and she looks like a baby. And there's a topless scene, so obviously she's not a baby, but she's willing to do anything for her husband's career because she loves him. And there's a scene where Salieri basically says, sleep with me, and he has the position of this teacher. And because basically at the time, composers didn't make a lot of money, so they needed to do other jobs, and one of the other jobs that you could do was be a teacher to the rich and powerful elites. So basically there is a competition to be the music teacher for the niece of the emperor, and Salieri has decided that he hates God and therefore he hates Mozart, so he's going to make Mozart's life really difficult by trying to destroy his career. So he says there should be a committee, and so Mozart is like deeply offended because he's the best composer in Vienna, and he's not going to apply for this. But his wife is like, yes, we need the money. So she sneaks around behind his back, and she takes the music to Salieri and says, hey, please help. And it's weird like how everybody goes to Salieri. Like she realizes after this that Salieri is no friend to Mozart. But so she goes, and he's basically like, this music is marvelous, but let me be clear, if you want him to have this position, you will come at night to me and we will have like a little bit of an affair. And so she comes back with the music at night, and she's willing to, do the deed, and she starts to get undressed, which is the topless scene I mentioned earlier. She's starting to get undressed, and then Salieri changes his mind because, he's a man of God and everything, and throws her out. And so she can kind of see what kind of man he is. And even after all of that, he doesn't get the position. And you might think and then she goes back and she's kind of devastated that she wasn't able to do this thing for Mozart. And she breaks down, and they have this nice scene together, but she never tells Mozart what she actually did. And I think that's one of those other, the acting that she does is really great, because she seems to be this frivolous woman who doesn't really understand much, but she is so passionate for him and his career and to protect him. And there's another scene later where Mozart is working on this Requiem, and the movie says that, the plot of the movie is that Salieri has commissioned this Requiem to try and destroy. So basically, Salieri wants Mozart to write a Requiem. He pays a lot of money for it, and he's going to murder Mozart, steal the Requiem, and pretend that it's his, so people will remember his one piece of music. Salieri's one piece of music, which is a great plot, but it doesn't end up happening. But anyway, so there's another great scene where Salieri rescues Mozart from a performance of the Magic Flute where Mozart collapses. And Mozart tells the Salieri that he has this Requiem that he has to do, and there's going to be a guy. And so Salieri realizes that Mozart is dying, but he wants the Requiem finished. So he's like, the deadline is by tomorrow. So they start to work on it. And that scene is really good because it shows how these two could have been really good friends. And in real life, they might have been friends because they did actually collaborate on a few pieces together. And it shows how Mozart is thinking, even when he's dying, he's thinking 15 steps ahead of Salieri. And Salieri was a really accomplished composer, not as great as Mozart, but he was one of the best musicians who wasn't Mozart, right? So he can't keep up with him. And it's really well written. But anyway, back to Constance. So Constance comes in after this night, and she sees that he's been writing this Requiem, and Mozart has told her that the Requiem is kind of making him crazy. So she's like, no, you're not working on this anymore. She just puts the foot down, and she throws Salieri out, and so she's basically like, Mr. Salieri, forgive me that I am too poor to have a servant show you out, but please respect my wishes and leave, which is a great line. And she locks the Requiem. She doesn't burn it, which also shows a lot of respect. She locks the Requiem in the cabinet, so Mozart's work won't be destroyed, but Mozart won't work on it. And the odd thing about that is, so the movie has shown us that she's really passionate, and that's another thing that, she really works as a character, but historically, his wife did really love him, but she was an accomplished musician herself. The whole family were musicians, and there's a bit of a subplot how, Mozart marrying this woman, so the woman was seen to be a bit beneath Mozart, but they were of the same social class. So, and he actually wanted to marry her sister originally, but so this was his choice, was this family, right? So it wasn't like he was marrying beneath himself. But then also, she would know music. She would have had a good grasp of music. And so there are little hints that she does know that, right? So she's looking at the Requiem, and it probably doesn't say Requiem, but she can see what he's working on, and she can recognize that it's that. So it's also really great filmmaking because it shows you something. It shows you that this is a fantasy, right? So it's hinting at the reality that Constance Mozart was actually musically adequate, at least, and she would have known what her husband was doing. And it plays into this plot of Salieri being jealous. But yeah, so those three actors do a really great job. And yeah, it's really hard, I think, for characters who do, like, Mozart lived, according to the movie, a dissolute life. He had too many debts, and then, you know, he was punished by dying an early death. But he is 100% sympathetic in the movie. And actually, Salieri is also sympathetic in the movie, even though he does horrible things. And Constance is also sympathetic, even though she's willing to use her body to promote her husband's career. Sympathetic. So the movie is actually incredibly good-natured, which is a delight. And then the plot is great. That's the first thing that is great about the movie. The acting is great. And then there are two other things that are really great about the movie. The visual design of the movie is really great. And I reviewed recently the 2023 movie Napoleon, starring Joaquin Phoenix. And that movie, my title for that review was Mud Painted with Mud, because it looks so brown. Like, the palette of that movie is brown. And it doesn't make a lot of sense because at the time, military uniforms would be really bright and colorful. And I think that the movie did a really good job. And I think that the crazy thing is that this was just expected at the time that this movie came out, and now we've gone away from it. But the movie is not like obnoxiously colorful, but there is color where there should be color. So when Mozart is talking to the Emperor of Austria, one of the most powerful men in Europe at the time, it's full of ornate colors, and, you know, the patterns on the costumes are accurate and ornate. And there's like this thing where Mozart is trying these different wigs, and it's so great. The visual design is quite stunning, and it kind of makes you realize what Hollywood can't do anymore. And I think this might be an over-exaggeration, but I think the thing that people think that Hollywood is dying because of DEI or like wokeism or, you know, lack of intellectual creativity, which that might be true. But I think that the reason that Hollywood is dying is because, one of the reasons is because movies just look ugly nowadays. So if you're gonna, like, if you have a choice of spending $20 to go see a movie that looks ugly or watching it at home, you're gonna watch it at home, right? So yeah, color, great. Visually, like, just the design of the characters and stuff. And there's the scene where Mozart's dead and he's being buried, and he gets there's like this coffin, and there's this door on the coffin, and you're like, why does the coffin have a door? And they just dump his body in this kind of like common grave and pour it with lime, and like, it's really like, it's at the, you know, there's a graveyard and it's dark and stuff, but there are actual colors, because even when the weather is crappy, you can still see color, you know, because darkness, like a dimness, does not remove color. So it's a really good design visually, and that's a kind of really powerful and moving scene, like saying that Mozart doesn't have any friends. But again, that's historically inaccurate, because he was buried in a common grave, because commoners would have been buried in a common grave in Vienna at the time. But basically what that meant is that you were buried in a grave and you stayed there for 10 years, and then another person was, you were removed and then put in the common grave. And we don't really do that so much anymore, but if you go to older European cemeteries, you'll see things like that. Yeah, and when he died, there were masses said for him, and the emperor came, and because he was a celebrity, basically. So it wasn't like nobody cared that he died. A lot of people cared that he died, and he had a lot of friends too. So the other thing that and the other great thing is like so opera, of course, big part of Mozart's life, but the operas are actually shown, at least parts, and you see like theatricalness of that time. And there's a great farce that somebody puts on of his opera, and Mozart is watching it, and at first he's a bit offended, but then he gets really into it, and they have this big horse. It's just so over the top. It's really, really great. And the other thing is that the music of Mozart is this character, right? And that, so, you see the music of during the opera scenes, which is really great. But the best use of music as a character here, I think, is in that scene that I mentioned previously where Salieri is composing, is like transcribing Mozart's work when Mozart is on his deathbed. And, he's saying the musical stuff, and I don't know enough about music to tell you if what they're talking about is actually accurate or not. But basically, Mozart will say something, Salieri will write it, and then the soundtrack is us hearing what they're talking about. And, he goes bum, 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 and bum, bum, bum. And then, so this is this requiem that is unfinished. And then the transition between, like, it's not immediate. There's a little scene with Constance in between, but like Mozart dies, and then like a few scenes later, then you hear the whole requiem as his carriage is being brought to the cemetery. It's really, really good, really, really powerful. I mean, it's not a movie that will make you cry by any stretch of the imagination, but it's such an enjoyable movie. It's like over the top, it's theatrical, it's like everything Mozart was. And I think that it succeeds in showing you the character of Mozart, which this Napoleon movie doesn't show you the character of Napoleon whatsoever. So I think people might consider it to be the best biopic of all time, but I don't even think it's a biopic. I think it's just a great movie. And if we want to categorize it as a genre, like fantasia, like historical fantasia, like the playwright said about it. And there's another point, another little thing that I wanted to talk about that I didn't really remember earlier, which is the relationship between Salieri and Mozart is really, really complicated. But there are like these times when they're talking and you can see that they genuinely like each other. It's just that Salieri has this like crazy mission from God against God. So one of them is where he's talking and Mozart's like begging him for a favor, and Mozart kisses his hand and he says, "Oh, it's not a holy relic." And that's because that's what Mozart did when he met the emperor, which is, kind of understandable. If you're the emperor, people are always kissing your hand and you're like, ugh, don't do that. So Mozart's like, oh, ha ha ha. And then he gives this goofy laugh of his. And then there's another one where they're talking about, Salieri has torpedoed Mozart's opera career. And so Salieri, but he loves Mozart's work, right? So he goes to the opera, and then Mozart's like, 5 performances? I don't understand. Why only 5 performances? And Salieri's like, I think that you're overestimating the intelligence of your audience. Basically, he says it in a different way, but that's basically what he's saying. And he's like, Salieri's like, you didn't put a bump bump so that they know when to clap. And Mozart's like, ha 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 ha. And then Mozart's like, maybe you could teach me. And Salieri's like, and then he's dead serious, like, no, I won't teach you anything. I won't presume anything. And then there's like, and that's why the storytelling is great, because then there's a performance of Salieri's opera, which is, contrasted with all of Mozart's operas that you can see. And there's too many people on stage. It's really, really boring. And Mozart's there. And then when the song ends, there's a bump, bump, bump. And then people are clapping. And then the emperor, of course, as I said, because he doesn't know anything about music, he's like, Salieri, you're the best creator of opera we have in Vienna today. And then, Mozart is there, and he's like, what? Basically. But he goes up, because he's not a mean guy. He goes up to Salieri, and you can just see, like, he wants to say something really mean to Salieri, to, like, destroy him. But Salieri's like, oh, what did you think, Herr Mozart? And he's just like a little child seeking approval of his father, even though Salieri is much older. And Mozart's like, yes, that was certainly an interesting combination of notes. It is pure Salieri. And, he managed to make a compliment, but it's also not a compliment, right? Because he didn't say that it's the greatest opera ever in Vienna, which would be a lie, right? But he did give Salieri a compliment. So I think that relationship is really well done. So the movie, unfortunately, a little weird thing about the movie is, so the director's cut has kind of so usually what happens is there's like a theatrical cut, and then the director's cut comes out, and mostly you can watch the theatrical cut or the director's cut. You'll have like a choice. But when the director's cut of this movie came out, which is 3 hours and includes such scenes as Constance topless, it kind of replaced the theatrical cut. So I have watched the director's cut, and 3 hours is a bit much for a movie, but like maybe pause it, walk around, talk to somebody, and then come back to the movie. And it is great. It's a great movie. Is it the best movie I've seen this year? I mean, this year is only 10 days old, so I would say yes. But like this year, I mean, my entire project of being the most prolific reviewer of all time, I would say no. It certainly succeeds in everything that it's doing, so I would give it like a 10 out of 10, but I wouldn't say that it's the best movie I've ever seen, or the best movie I've ever seen for this project. The best movie I've seen for this project is probably Incendie, the Denis Villeneuve film. I just think that's more, it's just more complicated. It's a more adult themed film than this one, although this one is very enjoyable, and probably more people would like Amadeus than they would Incendie, honestly. So yeah, one of the best movies ever, for sure. Deserving of a Best Picture win. But let me know what you think. Put your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you like what I do, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. My goal is to have 500 subscribers by the end of March. Currently, I have, what do I have? I have 330, according to the last time I checked. So I think that's doable. And if you're listening on Spotify, please give me a follow. All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.